Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Stand Up to Racism's Holocaust Memorial Day event. This year, meeting on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. My name's Michaela Loebner, and I'm a member of Stand Up to Racism in South London. I'm also an early years teacher, and I'm also the daughter of a Jewish refugee who came to the UK as a child on the kinder transport. I just thought I would introduce myself in that respect. Um, this year we meet at a time when I'm sure everybody watching is feeling a huge level of concern and worry, recognizing that the far right and the forces of fascism are on the march once again. And I think that means that when we come together collaboratively to reflect and commemorate the 6 million Jewish people who were systematically murdered on an industrial scale by the Nazis, I think it's really important that we recognize that our work is never done, and we can have no more clear evidence of that as we look around the globe, whether that's in America with Trump, with the Nazis saluting Elon Musk, in France, in Italy, in Austria, and now in Germany, where we have a street movement and members of parliament. We know that we need to not just look back, but we need to learn lessons and bring those lessons into our actions and our renewed determination to stop fascism beginning to build once again. I'm really honoured to introduce our speakers this evening, the first of whom is David Rosenberg. David is a member of the National Committee of the Jewish Socialist Group, and always involved in standing up to racism and fascism. So a warm welcome to you, David. Over to you.
Okay. Am I unmuted? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very, very, very much for inviting me. I'm just going to share the screen because I want to um, um, show you something while I'm talking, and I'll just take me a minute to get it exactly where I want it. And I hope that's clear for everyone. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Excellent. So, shortly after midnight last night, we received an email from a very dear friend. Her name is Irena, and you can see her on two of the pictures on your screen. She's the one standing up. She's 83 years old and lives today in New York, where she is a writer, a poet, and an activist, especially on women's rights and lesbian rights and against anything Trump does. She was born in April 1941 in the Warsaw Ghetto, when the ghetto was growing to its peak number of 450,000 Jews and some Roma gypsies in a space of 1.3 square miles, with an average of 9 persons sharing one room. Somehow, Irena and her mum survived, although they were separated in late 1942. Irena was cared for in a convent. Her mum, Roshka, passing as a non-Jewish Pole with false papers, worked as a maid with a Polish Catholic family who were sheltering her. In 1943, the ghetto went up in flames. Irena's father, and he's in the middle there, Irena's father, Michal, Irena's father, an activist with the Jewish Socialist Bund, never saw either of them again. He had been hiding with a Polish Catholic family making improvised weapons, which he smuggled in to the ghetto resistance. On 17th of April 1943, on his 30th birthday and Irena's second birthday, he smuggled in his last consignment of weapons, knowing that if he took them in, he would not come out as the uprising was imminent. He was killed on the second day of the uprising. Irena and her mum reunited in 1944. They then moved to the town of Lodz, or Łódź in Polish, Lodz in Yiddish, and after the war went to Sweden and later settled in New York, where they lived in a housing co-op in the Bronx among several other survivors. Her email yesterday, just after midnight, was to thank myself and my wife Julia profusely for an article we had written, published in the Morning Star yesterday, that she had read online about the politics of Holocaust Memorial Day in 2025. And also she wrote to send us a link to what Irena called her modest contribution, which was a video she had made for an organization in America called Jewish Voice for Peace. In it, she said, at the end of the war, people said never again. For a lot of us, it was never again for anyone, not just Jews. Palestinians deserve a life where they can feel safe, where they can have hope, where they can look to a future. She called on her government in the US to stop arming Israel. Irena is very committed to preserving and enhancing Jewish culture, especially Yiddish culture, but she refuses to let anyone pit the human rights and existence of Jewish people in the world against the human rights and existence of Palestinians suffering from the oppression of the Israeli government and military. Just as we, as Jewish socialists, here refuse to pit the struggles of Jewish communities against anti-Semitism and Muslim communities against Islamophobia against each other. We unite with Muslims and other anti-racists against both and against any other forms of racism. And we look to other minorities to unite with us against any and all anti-Semitism. Irena has returned to Warsaw several times, particularly in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, reading her poetry to Jews and non-Jews, taking part in projects there with people there, committed both to remembering the past and opposing all bigotry today in order to build a better world. We might have hoped that 80 years after Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army, and 30 years since the siege of Sarajevo and the genocide against Bosnian Muslim men and boys in Srebrenica, that humanity could, in 2025, just remember with pride our success in defeating fascism and race hatred. But instead, across Europe, America, in Israel, in India, the far right are growing in strength once again, exploiting economic issues through phony cultural wars to unleash their hatred and push anti-nationalist agendas. Unfortunately, they are aided and abetted by feeble centrist politicians whose only response is to adapt to those far-right agendas. Here it is especially around the issues of migrants and refugees. We live in the most dangerous times and we need to find ways to resist on many different levels. In the 1930s, it seemed to be very much about brave physical resistance at barricades and street confrontations against the fascists. The Battle of Cable Street here, the Battle of Christie Pitts in Toronto, the brave resistance of the international brigades in Spain. But it was also about ideology, about how to undermine the fascist support, how to expose their lies to their own supporters, and how to meet the real needs for housing, meaningful and properly paid work, and offer those who are heading towards the far right a vision of a better and more equal society if they go in another direction. We know that fascism can arise anywhere, among any people, against an other that they label inferior, marginalize, and dehumanize. But we also know from our anti-fascist histories that courage to resist can grow anywhere. Not just individual courage, but collective courage. And that comes from building solid links at a human level, organizing and supporting with each other in our own localities and communities. The Holocaust was enacted over such vast distances. At Auschwitz, where the brick buildings of the main prison camp have been turned into museum displays that illustrate how the Holocaust was enacted, there's a map that shows the different countries from which Nazis transported Jews to Auschwitz to be industrially murdered. One long line stretches from Norway, where a few hundred Jews were rounded up and transported. More than 40 of them were transported on a boat called the Monte Rosa on the first part of their journey. Towards the end of the war, that ship was captured by the British. It was refitted and renamed post-war to transport people from the Caribbean to work here. It had become the Empire Windrush. We mourn those that were transported on it by the Nazis to their deaths. We celebrate the role that the ship inadvertently played in enhancing our multicultural society. I want to close by returning to Warsaw and and a remarkable permanent exhibition in its Jewish Historical Institute. So I'm just trying to um, add another slide here, but it's not doing it right. Let me see if I can do this. Here we are. Okay. Um, yeah, that exhibition celebrates the man I've just put up on the slide, Emanuel Ringelblum, a Polish Jew who co-led a network of mutual aid societies organizing underground soup kitchens and secret educational and cultural initiatives with drama, poetry, art, and music programs, especially for children. But above all, this exhibition highlights an underground research project he founded, calling itself Oyneg Shabbos, Society for the Pleasure of the Sabbath. Its 12 co-workers documented and archived life in the ghetto under Nazi occupation. And they did this secretly without the Nazis knowing they were doing this. They had contact with around 60 others who distributed and collected questionnaires and notebooks to ordinary people. So they were building up a whole picture of what was happening inside the ghetto. When the mass deportations to death camps began in July 1942, they knew that they were actually recording the destruction of the people, and they sent that information out of Poland through clandestine routes. Its archived materials were buried in metal boxes and milk churns, and I'll just show you an image here. Yeah, there's that's one of the that's one of the actual milk churns, which is in the Jewish Historical Institute, and there's a plaque there which I'll mention in a moment. The They say history, they say, is written by the victors, but here the history was written and described by the victims on the eve of their destruction. And researchers today are still making new insights based on those archives that were preserved. The first cache was unearthed in 1946, the second in 1950. Rochel Auerbach, who was one of the few members of the project who survived, said that there was a third cache and that has never been found. One of the people who buried the archive was a 19-year-old, David Graeber, who was killed soon afterwards in Treblinka. But a message that he wrote survived with the material. And it said, what we were unable to shout out to the world, we hid underground. May this treasure end up in good hands. May it live to see better times. May it alert the world. And on the plaque, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, it says that what we could not shout out to the world in Yiddish. The Nazis were eventually defeated, but in 2025, from here to America, where the far right white supremacist Trump again holds the reins of power, from here to Gaza and the West Bank, from here to everywhere where there is collective punishment and murderous oppression right now, the world is waiting once again to see those better times. Thank you. I'll stop the share.
Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, have I stopped the share or is it stopped?
You've stopped. That's great. Thank you so much, David. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce to you all is Rabbi Herschel Gluck, who many people will recognize from always being there to stand alongside people when the far right are on the move and where solidarity is needed. Um, Herschel Gluck is a communal rabbi in Stoke Newington, and the chair also of the Muslim Jewish Forum there in Hackney. I would love to introduce him now to speak to us again. Thank you, Herschel Gluck.
Thank you very much, Michaela. It's interesting. I was thinking about your name, and your name is made up of two. Your family name is made up of two elements: Leb, which means a lion, and Ner, which in Hebrew means a light, a candle. So it's very appropriate for this evening that when we need more light in the world where there's so much darkness, that at times we think, how can we? But when you're a lion, so that gives you the strength and the ability to bring light into a dark situation. As Jews, this week we are reading in the Torah, as we do every week in the synagogue, about the Egyptian exile and about the difficulties of the Egyptian exile. And it was very, very dark. But that darkness didn't stop the Jews believing in a better future, in a better world. And that happened, even though the darkness was great. At the moment, we are living in a time which the darkness is on the march. And 80 years in Judaism is called the time of strength. Because if a person reaches the age of 80, there must be some strength in play in that person. And I think now, 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, we should know that despite everything that has been thrown at us, thank God we have the strength to commemorate what happened and to apply it to our situation now. The similarities between the 1930s with the rise of fascism and what we're seeing now cannot be ignored. Of course, I'm not comparing our present situation to the 1930s when parts of Europe became Judenrein and Jewish shops were systematically destroyed and Jewish homes were burned and Jews were expelled into no man's land, similar to what we see today in Belarus on the border of Poland, where thousands of refugees find themselves in no man's land between Belarus and Poland. This was a similar situation which Jews were in the late 1930s when Polish Jews were expelled from Germany to Poland, not like now where it's from east to west, then it was from west to east. And Jews were kicked out of Germany but couldn't enter Poland. And the similarities are too stark to ignore. But like then, there was silence. But sadly, today, 80 years later, there's silence again. We've totally forgotten what these poor people who were forced out of their homes, forced out of their countries by policies which were initiated in the West. And these people are the victims. And now they are homeless and stateless and were silent. And that was what similar happened to the Jewish people in Germany of Polish heritage that they were called the Ostjuden, the Jews from the East, and they were kicked. They were some of the first victims of Hitler. He kicked them out of Germany because they weren't real Germans, because they had Polish heritage. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose, as our dear French friends say. Hitler, my father was was about 13 when Hitler came to power. When Hitler made Anschluss in Austria. And many Jews said at the time, okay, Hitler has said some strange things, but he's a bulwark against the Bolsheviks. Not all Jews were communists. Jews were, like today, they were very mixed. And they thought that even though that Hitler had said things which were disturbing, but the Bolsheviks, they're the real issue, and he will protect us from the Bolsheviks. And we hear similar sentiments today about Donald Trump and his entourage, that they might have issues, but they are on our side. They will protect us from the big bad wolves out there who want to get us. And I think we need to learn from history that sadly, not only Hitler didn't protect us, but he was the greatest danger to our people and to other people, be they Roma, be they disabled people, be they gay people, be they people of color, people of all people whose lives were described as not worth living by the Nazis, and that caused the death of tens of millions of people because we refused to see the stark truth which was facing us and which was there in plain sight. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is Hitler, and I'm not saying that we are living in the 1930s, but at the same time, we are in a much better position than the people in the 1930s to call a spade, because we have experience. And there's a famous saying that history has taught us that history doesn't teach us anything, but that saying is there to say that we shouldn't be satisfied with history not teaching us anything, but we should learn from history, and history should inform our behavior now. I speak as someone whose family lost hundreds of people in the Holocaust and during the Holocaust. Family being slave laborers, then sent to extermination camps. And those who survived as refugees. And I think we have to remember and not forget our history and our experiences. When I was a child, I grew up amongst people, many of them, and I mean many of them, had numbers tattooed on their arms, which they got when they entered Auschwitz. And these people not only survived, but they built beautiful families after the war and contributed so much to British society and to other societies where their fellow survivors went. And I think the biggest contribution that these people made is to live as living examples of being able to survive the terrible atrocities which should have never have happened in the first place, and happened because good people were silent, because we were bystanders, because we didn't raise our voices and say, no, they will not pass. We will not allow this to happen. And today we have to do that again. We have to say and stand up and be counted and say that we will not allow these types of atrocities in any form or in any shape to happen again. David said before about 9 people living in a room, and that is really terrible. I think many people in Gaza would wish that they would have 9 people in the room. Unfortunately, they don't have any rooms. And we have to make sure that people, wherever they are and whoever they are, do not suffer. And never again means never again for anyone. And thank you very much for hosting this event. And let us hope that we will all be inspired to create a better world for everyone.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. That was so powerful. I'd like to now hand over to Sabby Dhalu, who's one of, we have 2 conveners of Stand Up to Racism, Sabby being one, and I'd like to hand over to you, Sabby, now for your words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michaela. So listening to Holocaust survivors, as well as Rabbi Gluck and David Rosenberg today, and Jewish people whose relatives were brutally murdered in the Holocaust, it's always a moving and humbling experience. And I want to thank both Rabbi Gluck and David Rosenberg for joining us today, and indeed all Holocaust survivors who have been sharing their stories yesterday, and as we mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. And it was liberated by the army of the Soviet Union. And I think as we mark 80 years since its liberation, it's becoming even more important to remember and learn from Holocaust survivors, because many of the living survivors are in their 90s, and soon there won't be any living Holocaust survivors. And it will be up to us to remember and ensure generations to come know their stories and pledge never again. So what does never again mean? So I think never again means learning the lessons of history and stopping the rise of racism and fascism today. So how do we do that? Well, I believe we need to do the following. So firstly, never again means we remember and understand that the mass murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust was a deliberate attempt to eliminate Jewish people from Europe, that anti-Semitism was at the foundation of the Holocaust and a basic tenet of Nazi ideology. It was also widespread throughout Europe, including Britain. So never again means combating and eradicating anti-Semitism today, because that's what learning the lessons of history means. Secondly, in addition to 6 million Jews, it is estimated that millions of others, approximately 5 million others, were also mass murdered by the Nazis, including Soviet prisoners of war, ethnic Poles, Roma, Sinti people, Serbs, Jehovah's Witnesses, LGBT, Black, disabled people, German political opponents and dissenters, including socialists, communists and trade unionists. So never again means combating and eradicating all forms of racism, Islamophobia, and defending refugee, human and democratic rights and freedoms. So that means we must call out far-right Islamophobic cartoons that are virtually identical to anti-Semitic Nazi cartoons. We must say an attack on a synagogue or an attack on a mosque, Sikh Gurdwara or Hindu temple is an attack on all of us. We must challenge racism towards African Caribbean communities. And I'd like to pay tribute to a wonderful Jewish man, Dr. Richard Stone, who we sadly lost last year, who sat on the panel of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and was an executive member of the National Assembly Against Racism. He understood the importance of Jewish communities supporting the struggles faced by Black people. Never again also means defending the right to asylum, calling for safe passage for refugees crossing the Channel, and stopping the horror of human beings drowning to reach safety. Thirdly, never again means mobilizing against fascists, just like Jews, communists, socialists, trade unionists, and others mobilized to stop Mosley's fascists at Cable Street, and the A&L mobilized to defeat the National Front, and indeed, like many of us, stop the racist riots last summer. We must be prepared to mobilize again and again against the far right and fascists, including this Saturday against Tommy Robinson supporters. Fourthly, never again means calling out Nazi salutes and not pretending they are something else. Never again means understanding that we have an enormous struggle on our hands. And above all, never again means uniting against racism and fascism. That means Jews, Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, people of no faith, trade unions, liberals, socialists, communists, African, Caribbean, Asian, LGBT, disabled people, and all those that want to fight racism and fascism joining together against a common enemy. At a time when the far right and fascism is resurgent, I believe this is how we can ensure that never again is a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabby. Really powerful words as well. I'm just going to now introduce our final speaker for this evening, who is Sabby's co-convener of Stand Up to Racism, and that's Weyman Bennett. So over to you, Weyman.
I'd like to thank the speakers that have come before me, David Rosenberg and Rabbi Gluck, for giving us such a clear direction of the mass murder of the Jewish community as part of the Holocaust. When you go into Auschwitz, there's a sign there and it says this. It says, those that do not understand history are doomed to repeat it. And beneath it, it says never again. And as you go past the piles of children's clothes, as you go past the piles of glasses, as you go past the shoes, the hair that was collected, you see a factory of death. I did an assembly about the Holocaust, and they asked me, in terms of mass killings, why is this different? And I wanted to say that it's unique in one special way. Factories of death, the application of all human endeavor was there to kill people with a political ideology behind it that followed. And that's why we say never again. The generation that saw the Holocaust had never seen anything like it before. No generation had seen that. We have the benefit of, they say, hindsight, of learning from the cries of those voiceless people that had their life stolen from them. We have the opportunity to stop the little Hitlers today and expose them when they're small and break them when they're small. It's not true that you cannot stop the far right. Malcolm X once said, we are not outnumbered, we are often sometimes out-organized. And it's important that when we remember the Holocaust, the reason why we remember it is those people who had lost their lives, the 12 million, it's because they were robbed because of Nazi ideology. And when people today tell us or gaslight us, that say they do not understand when Elon Musk makes a Nazi salute why it's an insult to the millions that were murdered. It's important that we speak out. But before the Nazis took power, there was a period. It was called appeasement. And that's what we see today. We do not see that people don't see it's happening. We see people around, when they see these things, appease them and say it's not that, it's something else. We will not be lied to. We will not be fooled. We will make sure that we stand out and resist what's taken place before. When you go through Auschwitz, you go there and you see the triangles and you see the different groups of people who they murdered. You see first the mass murder of the Jews. You see the red star of the communists and the socialists and the trade unionists that they murdered. You see the pink in which they murdered the LGBTQ community. You see the Roma. You see a group of people who they call the Rhineland bastards, who were mixed German and American soldiers, who also went to the camps because they were deemed to be biologically inferior. And we say the politics of white supremacy and racism has to be rejected in all its forms. Anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Roma racism, whichever form it takes place. And the one thing that the Nazis with their stars did was show the ammunition that we need to break them back. Because all the groups together, if they form a fist, they can push back what's taking place. Sometimes when you listen to the mass media today, you have the sense that people like what the President of the United States says and the filth that comes out of his mouth, that everybody agrees with it. The majority of people reject that level of division and hatred. It is a billionaire boys club that he belongs to, in which he denigrates women, a criminal as a president. And we have to say that every time the fascists appear on the street and try and build a movement like the brown shirts, every time they come out, we have to oppose them. And that's why the 1st of February is very important, because the school bully makes themselves strong by appearing to be a mighty dragon, as Hitler said. So we have to oppose them and give them no space, no chance to organize, no chance to build. And we have to say to the appeasers, the people from Reform, the fascist enablers, that the road to Auschwitz was built by those very bricks of poison and division. And we also have to celebrate the forces that we can do to resist. The trans rights. We have to say that women have rights. We have to say that the young have rights. We have to fight for these things. And we will never give them up. We'll never give them up because of the memory we have of the last slaughter in the 20th century when this took place. That's why we need organizations that remember and organize and resist. So I'm very proud to be part of this meeting. We're part of the resistance. We're part of the memory. We do not forget. We do not forgive. We organize. We resist. And we fight today to make sure that yesterday's mass murder doesn't happen tomorrow. The last Holocaust was analog. It was done on pen and paper and typing. The next Holocaust will be an AI-driven Holocaust. And we have to make sure that that never happens, that we have a future that remembers the Holocaust as something that can never happen again. So please organize with us. It's an international fight, and it's a fight that we can all take together. We should never surrender, and we should never give in, because if we fight back, we can win. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Weyman. I think that was an incredibly powerful end to our meeting this evening. I'm sure everyone will agree the speeches were moving, they were powerful, and they offer clarity to guide us because we're in the fight of our lives And I know that we are going to stand together. We won't let them pass. We will remain united. We will build that resistance that Weyman and Herschel, Gluck and Sabby and David spoke of. So let's go forward, everybody. Build that united front against the fascists and the far right. And let's make sure that it can never happen again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're offline.
Thank you.